Before we get started, I have an exciting announcement. We are launching a line of Head South pleasure provisions, products designed to decrease friction and enhance connection. Discover a new level of intimacy and connection with Head South's upcoming range of premium sexual wellness products, including 2 intimacy serums and a luxurious massage oil. Join our waitlist today and enjoy an exclusive 15% off on your first order. You can find the link in our show notes and head over to headsouth.world. And now let's start the episode.
Management there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hey there, I'm Kat Meyer, and this is Head South Radio. I'm so excited for you to hear this episode, as it was a huge honor for me to interview this guest. I could easily say that reading his books, The Big Leap and Conscious Loving, changed my life. Those books helped me to recognize the limiting beliefs I imposed on myself and were pivotal in breaking my codependent patterns in my relationships. Gay Hendricks is no stranger to the world of relationships and personal growth. With a career spanning over 4 decades, he's not only a licensed therapist, but also the author of numerous best-selling books on topics ranging from conscious relationships to personal development. We dive into the intricacies of codependency, an all too common yet often misunderstood phenomenon. With his unique blend of wisdom and experience, Gay offers insights into recognizing codependent patterns, breaking free from their grasp, and fostering healthier, more empowered relationships. I hope this episode resonates with you or someone you know. Don't hesitate to share it and spread the word on Instagram. If you could show your support by leaving a review or rating on your preferred podcast platform, sharing your feedback fuels our growth, and we're incredibly grateful for it. Happy listening. So, Gay, I like to get started by just grounding ourselves and kind of doing a quick little meditation before we jump into the conversation. So, just find your seat. You can kind of shift your weight forward and back, side to side. Allow the sit bones to drop into the seat below you. And from that rooted, grounded experience, can you grow a little taller through the crown of your head, finding integrity with your spine? And close your eyes or just soften your gaze. Just take a quick moment to observe your breath. And then setting an intention for yourself for this conversation. And when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can start to blink them open, taking in the light, taking in your space, taking in the screen. Hello. So, Gay, I wanted to start by explaining that you have written quite a few books, and one of them is called The Big Leap, which is conquering your hidden fear and taking life to the next level. It's one that I see now everywhere on Instagram. It was recommended to me last summer, and I can say it's completely changed my life. It's probably the book that I have recommended more to people than any other book in my lifetime, and I recommend a lot of books to people. And so that book is extremely powerful. It changed my perspective of time. It changed how I experience life and the dynamics in my life. It changed how I view things that are going on and like how I recognize where I'm limiting myself. And so it's definitely had a huge shift in the course of this past year. But the reason I wanted to bring you on to Head South Radio is to talk about a book that you co-wrote with your wife, Katie, many, many years ago, called Conscious Loving, which focuses on relationships and codependency. And a little chapter in The Big Leap does focus on relationships. You do bring it because it is important part of our life. But this Conscious Loving was the second book that I read by you immediately after reading The Big Leap. And that too had such a profound shift in all of my relationship dynamics, not just the romantic ones. But what I realized in that is that most people aren't aware that we are codependent, and 90% of Americans are in codependent relationships. And for me, I didn't know until I read your book, and I was like, wait a minute. You list out I think 9 or 10 traps that we kind of fall into. And I think most people recognize codependency from the lens of alcoholism and Al-Anon and that type of dynamic. And so I think those are the first two traps that you express in the book of destructive behaviors. So it's either one partner is the destructive person and the other person is just turning a blind eye or putting their head in the sand, or vice versa. The other person is destructive and you are turning a blind eye and enabling that to happen. So I think that's how most people view codependency. So a lot of us are just walking around unaware of there's so many other traps or dynamics. Would you mind giving us a little overview or an intro to what codependency is?
Yes, well, let me explain it this way. If you go back to the first year of life, there's a well-known psychiatrist at Yale named Margaret Mahler, MD, and she has a really important insight. She says in the first year of life, we as babies go through a specific stage. We start out, the first 6 months of life is all about union, nurturing, cuddling, holding, being close to another person, letting down all your barriers and becoming one. And that's usually with your mother, of course. And if things are going well in the first 6 months of life, then you do get a lot of that nurturing. The second 6 months of life, according to Margaret Mahler, and I think you can check this out for yourself, is the exploration phase where you start out 6 months of cuddle, but then you want to explore. You get down on the ground and you begin to crawl around and you look around. And that's what Margaret Mahler calls the individuation stage. And she says that we go through those throughout our lives, that part of us is about connection, unity, and part of us is about individuation, finding our own balanced, connected connection to the universe that doesn't involve going through another person for that connection. So both of those are incredibly important and become more important as you get up into adult life. Because what happens is a lot of people, well, let's say there's two possible different kinds of places where you can be wounded. You can have wounds by failing to get close to other people. Let's say you're rejected by your mother, or that happens in rare cases, or your mother can't take care of you. That's what happened with me. Fortunately, my grandmother lived next door and kind of stepped in. But as I've done therapy work on myself in the past, I realized that wasn't the connection that was most important to me. So it took me a while to move through that. But just assume for a minute that you, like me and everybody else, goes through periods of time where we want to be close and periods of time where we want to be individuated, separate. Now, people get wounded on the getting close phase, but people also get wounded on the individuation phase. Just as an example, let's say you start crawling when you're 6 months old and you go over and stick your hand in the fire. That's a dramatic example, but later on in life, you choose maybe between, well, around here we give them funny names. We say either you're a glommer or a splitter. A glommer is a person who they just love to hug you. They want to get close. If you're a hugger, you like to connect with people. And then some of us, though, are splitters. We like to stay a little separate from other people. We're not the people that are going to give you a hug first. So people tend to gravitate toward either being very into the unity phase or very into the individuation phase. And of course, most love songs are about the union phase, but there are some about the individuation phase, like Don't Fence Me In, for example, was a famous, Katie used to accuse me of having that as my theme song when I first got together with her, because I was a super splitter. I really didn't enjoy hugging people. Later, after I met Katie and got to be more of a hugger, I got to feeling okay about that. But I even remember one time when we were first together, we were walking down the street and she put her arm around me, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I wasn't used to public displays of affection. So we came from very different places in that regard. The important point, though, is that everybody has both urges in us. We have an urge to merge and an urge to be our own separate person. And if you have both of those fully developed in yourself, that's conscious loving. But if you don't have one or the other of those, that's unconscious loving or codependence, where you're basing your life on somebody else's life. Instead of having your own life and your own identity, you merge with somebody else to the extent that you don't feel like you have your own identity. So that's a common codependent move. I remember I worked with a very well-known couple one time, and I often ask, how are you feeling right now? Just to both of them, to both. And that's one of my first, because I'm really interested in watching how they respond to that. Because what happens when a couple is codependent is like what happened in this situation. Immediately, she looked over at him before going inside and figuring out what she felt. She looked over at her husband to see what he was feeling. And it turned out to be a big key to their interaction style, because she was so identified with him. He was the more famous one of the two. And she was so identified with him, though, that her big complaint was, there's no room in this relationship for me. Of course there is. There's room. It's an inside job that both of us need to come out to the edge of ourselves and be willing to express the fullness of ourselves in union with another person, and also express the fullness of ourselves as individuals. And so many people don't realize that. They talk about their spouses, my other half or my better half. And that's an insight into how they see themselves, because there's a real problem if you see you and the other person as 100%, because in actual fact, you're each 100%. When you get together with another person, you're merging your 100% with the other person's 100%. But if you're only occupying half of your 100%, then you go into the relationship looking for the other person to make your decisions for you or take care of you or figuring out what you ought to have for lunch. I saw in my own family of origin, my uncle and aunt who lived next door to me when I was growing up, they had a very enmeshed relationship. And so did my grandparents, who also lived on the same block. So I grew up in an extended Southern family where my grandparents lived in a big house, and then an aunt and uncle lived in a smaller house, and then my mother and I and my brother lived in another house. So we were all within a stone's throw of each other. And so that's very, very different than a lot of people live today. But I got to see a lot of different family interactions. And one of the main things, after my aunt died, my uncle had literally never boiled an egg in the 50 years of their marriage, and he was like a helpless little boy. And I mean, we really had to go over and kind of help him learn the things that you might learn if you're graduating from high school and moving into your first apartment, but here he was, a 70-year-old guy. And so my grandparents, in a way, had the same kind of relationship. My grandmother was the matriarch, and I don't think my grandfather, he made the money, but he didn't have any input into anything else. It was all my grandmother's show. And the same thing happened. My grandmother died when she was 82, and my granddad lived on until he was 93. And it was amazing to see him have to invent a whole new life at age 80 something, because his codependent partner disappeared. So most of us won't have something so dramatic, but we all have to look around ourselves and ask, am I burying part of myself in relationship, or am I burying my need for relationship inside my urge for individuation? That's usually based on fear. It was for me. I was individuated because I was afraid of really letting my heart fully open to another person, for fear I'd get rejected again. And I'd had several early rejections, including my very first, fell in love with my high school girlfriend when I was a senior, and we were madly in love for 3 years, and then she dumped me. And that was a big rejection, because I always thought always be together. And then it suddenly at 19 or 20 years old, suddenly realized, oh, we had different picture of how our futures were supposed to go. And it came out of nowhere and hit me like a truck. So I think out of that wounded experience, I went out and got into another relationship that was very unhealthy, just kind of like what they say, a rebound relationship. I'm probably not alone, but I hope you haven't had the experience of being wounded and then trying to find what you were looking for in another person. And of course, it never works like that. And so I created a 3 or 4 year really miserable relationship because I don't think I ever really loved the person or the person loved me. It was about trying to recover from a past rejection. And so that never works, of course, because if you're trying to flee one problem for another, you usually get a worst version of the first one. You even get to feel more rejected than usual because then you're in a relationship, but then you feel rejected. So I always like to say my wife and I didn't get together until I was 34 and she was 31. And I say that's good because it allowed us to make every mistake it's possible to make about relationships in our teens and our 20s.
Let's take a quick break. Back in 2012, I made the bold decision to ditch traditional shampoo, and I've never looked back. How did I do it, you ask? With Hair Story New Wash. This product is not just a shampoo or conditioner, it's a unique all-in-one solution that gently cleanses your hair while maintaining its natural balance. No more harsh chemicals stripping away your hair's vitality. Hair Story New Wash uses a carefully crafted blend of essential oils, aloe vera, and fatty acids that cleanse and nourish your hair without any of the harmful stuff you find in traditional products. Here's a little secret. I used to work at Hair Story from 2013 to 2017, and even after that, I couldn't find anything that compares. This is a product I truly believe in, and that's why I'm excited to share it with you today. As a listener of our podcast, by using the link we provided in the episode notes, you'll get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase of Hair Story New Wash. Say goodbye to the shampoo bottle clutter and hello to healthier, more vibrant hair with Hair Story New Wash. Click the link, enjoy the discount, and give your hair the love it deserves. Now back to our episode. So I have a question. As I understand it, people will often, we contain both of those, the merging and independence, and we oscillate between those. But for some of us with certain wounds, it kind of turns up the volume on one or the other. And that's how we function in all of our relational dynamics. To your point of like this first relationship, there was a heartbreak and then trying to fill it with another relationship and just kind of avoiding the fact that this wasn't healed and that you're kind of playing out that all over again. I kind of refer to it as like you have a backpack and you think that you left the backpack with the other relationship, the luggage, your baggage, and you just keep carrying it and putting more and more stuff in there and then thinking that you're in a completely different relationship with somebody because they look different, they sound different, they're doing different things. But little do you know that you're still carrying all that same patterning, that behavior with you. That's correct when it comes to like our early development and how it plays out in adulthood?
Yes, and it can go, you can be wounded on the individuation stage, and then you try to make that up by kind of forcing yourself into relationships. I stayed single from 72 to late 70s because I don't think I trusted myself to get into another close relationship. I think I stayed, kind of like I always say, I kept the back door open. I never really made a commitment to anybody because I had that back door open for if I needed to make a quick escape. So fortunately, I used that 7 years of being single to do a lot of work on myself. And one thing I found, wow, is this a big deal? I think a lot of men have this problem, but I know I did growing up at the time I grew up. Men at that time weren't supposed to have feelings. You were supposed to be the strong, silent type. I never saw any male member of my extended family ever shed a tear. That blows my mind now because everybody in my family, my kids and everybody has seen me cry plenty of times. And I'm shocked now looking back that everybody kept their emotions so concealed. So I had a lot of learning to do. like just to be able to say simple things like, I feel angry right now, or I'm sad, or I'm scared. Those are easy things for me to say now because I've worked on myself and identified where those feelings are so I can be in touch with them. But rolling the clock back, 40 or 50 years, I didn't know any of that. I was like cut off from the neck down. I was very smart, but I didn't know how to use any of those smarts to really be more self-aware. And a number of women in my 20s that I would go out with during my single phase, they would say something to me like, you never say anything about yourself, or you never say anything about how you feel. And when they used to say that to me at first, I would say, oh gosh, I don't even know how to speak that language, and gradually though, it was very helpful to me. I learned there were 3 zones of my body that when I got feedback from them, like tension, that meant there were emotions present. Like if my shoulders and the back of my neck were tight, that meant I was angry and hadn't said anything about it. Okay, so that was a big learning. If my chest felt constricted or cloudy or a lump in my throat, that was sadness. And it was usually kind of a feeling down in my chest, a longing feeling or a kind of a tugging sensation. But when I felt that, I learned to say, I feel sad right now. I'm not sure why, but I feel sad. Then also fear. I was completely cut off from my fear. And to the extent that when I was scared, I used to overeat. And I didn't realize it. It was because I was feeling scared or lonely or cut off from the world. I would try to make it up by stuffing myself. Interestingly enough, nature has designed our bodies, God bless nature, but our fear mechanism is right next to our hunger mechanism in our belly. You feel butterflies in your stomach when you're afraid, and you feel hunger pangs when you're hungry. So no wonder so many of us stuff ourselves when we're feeling scared or lonely, thinking that's hunger. And I really had a lot to learn there about just letting myself feel my feelings rather than trying to make them go away, by eating or exercise or something, just to let myself feel what I was feeling. That was a huge learning. I mean, it literally took me years to get good at that. But now, once I got into my relationship with Katie, we made some agreements with ourselves that really helped. Like here in this relationship, it's okay to feel. If you're angry, I want to hear about it. If you're sad, I want to hear about it. If you're scared, I want to hear about it. So we made agreements with ourselves that it was okay to share our feelings no matter what they were with each other. You'd be surprised at how many couples, we've worked with, I think, close to 5,000 couples now, and you'd be surprised at how many of those folks come in with a mindset that they've got to keep their feelings hidden from the other person rather than revealing to the other person. And that's a troublesome problem because so many people, when they leave a relationship, they say, he would never tell me who he was, or I could never find out what she was feeling. It was all hidden down there. Another thing that we do in our relationship too is we make a point, Kat, of really celebrating each other, appreciating each other. Like already this morning, before I came in here to record this, I'd already said 2 or 3 appreciations to Katie, and she'd only been up a half an hour. But I make this point because even though she'd only been up a half an hour, I'd already found 2 or 3 things to appreciate in her about me too. And so you want to keep the relationship environment rich with appreciation, really rich with spoken appreciation, particularly. One of the things we do oftentimes in a first session with a couple is say, could you say one thing to your partner that's appreciative, that's design? And I remember this one guy says, I'm here, aren't I? That was the most appreciative thing he could come up to say. But, most of the times we don't get very good at training in how to communicate our feelings to the other people, or how to express appreciations. Or wouldn't it be great if, as first graders and second graders or kindergartners, we could learn things like how to solve a problem without making somebody wrong, or how to communicate deep feelings to another person without making them feel bad. Wow, that would be a genuinely useful school. I've actually visited schools where they do that, but they're few and far between. I'm a big believer in education. If we can do things with education early in life, a couple of my original books were in the field of education because I saw that, boy, if we could really make some of these differences happen in the classroom, people wouldn't need to spend their hard-earned pay in their 20s and 30s on therapy.
I'm right there with you. I'm a big advocate and fan of relational skills, life skills being taught in schools. I'm like, I didn't need geometry. I needed to know how to relate to partners and the people in my life and like how to communicate with colleagues and family members. Communication skills. We're not taught that. We're taught like, I'm like, I couldn't tell you what geometry was or what use it is in my life now as an adult, but having skills of communication and relating to people and deep listening. And exactly to your point, like problem resolution without people, labeling things as right or wrong. Or one of the things I love that you speak to, I can't recall if it's in The Big Leap or Conscious Loving or both, but like the playing out of I am the victim. That's what happens is like there's a point in a relationship dynamic of I am right, you are wrong, and I get to wear the crown and I get to be the victim. And now I don't deserve this. You fall victim to your own victimhood and you're the one putting the crown on. No one else is doing that.
Well, yes. And also, to make it even more complicated, all relationship arguments between a couple are a race to occupy the victim position. Because one person puts the victim hat on, as you say, and says, you're doing X, Y, Z, you're making me miserable. And the other person usually doesn't go along with that point of view. The other person doesn't usually say, you're right. I am responsible for all of your misery. It never happens in a relationship. What usually happens is the other person grabs for the hat and sticks it on and says, wait a minute, I'm the one that's the victim here. You're doing X, Y, and Z. And Katie and I spotted that problem early on, and we made a commitment to each other in our first year together to, as soon as we caught ourselves in the victim position, to take 100% responsibility and step out of it and say, okay, I did something that put myself here. What is it? And to say, okay, how am I creating this right now? And why would I be creating this miserable argument right now? And so to be able to start reflecting, we have this phrase we teach in our seminars called Hendricks aerobics, which is basically two moves. In relationship, you go like this, ha, like, ha, I got you. I understand who you are. You're wrong. And then you go, how did I create this? Ha, I know who the victim is here. It's me. And why did I set myself up as a victim? If you're willing to take that level of 100% responsibility, conflict drops like crazy. And we've consulted with many corporations about this very same problem. And we say, it doesn't matter if you're in the boardroom or the bedroom, it's that race to occupy the victim position, the thinking you're the victim and the other person is doing it to you. And so we've been in many, many boardrooms to help straighten people out as far as helping them take responsibility for what's coming up rather than blaming everybody else.
I love that. The visualization of like the like I got you, because whether you're the victim or you just want to be right.
Yeah, that's such a huge dynamic in relationship. I actually discovered that the month before I met Katie. I'd been in an on and off again relationship with a woman named Carol for 4 or 5 years. And we'd get together for a little while and then split up and back and forth. And we were having this argument one day. And suddenly I realized, oh, this is not our 500th argument over the past 5 years. This is our 500th version of the same argument. Because one of us would have some issue like anger. She'd be angry at me, or I'd be angry at her, or her feelings would be hurt, or my feelings would be hurt. And instead of just talking about that, what we would do would be start projecting onto the other person. Instead of saying, I'm scared or I'm angry, it was, you're making me angry, or I wouldn't be scared unless you were doing ... And so we'd immediately go for the victim position. And on this one particular day, I actually saw myself starting to do it and saw her. And I actually, in that moment, was when I came up with that thing. I was putting all my energy in, what's wrong with you? Why do you keep doing this? How come you got a da, 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 da? And she's busily doing the same thing to me. But what we were not doing is, what's in me that would make me choose to create this argument? That's a radical positive level of responsibility. And as soon as I learned to do that, that relationship fell apart. A month later, I met Katie, and we had this amazing first conversation where when I met her, I had the urge to ask her out for a cup of coffee, but I just had this big realization the month before. And so I said to her, I'd like to ask you out for coffee, but I've just realized that I mess up relationships by either not being honest about my feelings or not taking responsibility and blaming the other person. Or I said, there's a third way I mess up relationships. And by getting into relationships with people that aren't as passionate about their creative path as I am about mine. I'm a writer. I go in a room for 2 or 3 hours a day by myself. And if the other person has creative passions, they understand that because they've got those passions too. But if a person doesn't understand that, it looks like I'm checking out of the relationship for 3 hours a day, but to me, it's sacred time. So I said, I want to be in a relationship where both people are passionately committed to their own creativity. And so I said, on those terms, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? And her eyes kind of rolled back in her head for about 10 seconds. And then she said, yeah, how about lunch? And so that was 44 years ago. And now we're still together. It's been the most amazing ride, now to have spent, 2/3 of my life on earth married to the same person. You get a depth and richness learning about the other person, but also learning about yourself that, you really can't get any other way. And it's really the best game on earth. It's the best thing to do is to make your life be about your relationships, both with yourself and with another person. Because if you do that, you'll always be focusing on, how can I have the highest quality experience with myself right now and with people I'm in relationship with? We have to have two commitments. One is a commitment to develop as individuals, and the other is a commitment to develop as couples or as people in relationship, not just romantic couples. Both of those are key commitments because human beings have a twin urge to do both of those things. We have the urge to merge and the urge to individuate. Both of those need to be honored. So if there's one thing I hope your listeners and viewers will really get a deeper understanding of, is nurturing that deep sense of need to individuate, to have my own creative path in life, and also the urge to be in complete harmony with another person while I'm expressing that creativity. So to me, that's life at its best.
Do you have advice or exercises or activities that people can use to kind of navigate those two, balance those two, or hone in on that? And how do they interact with that with their partner? Because I feel like for some people, to your point of like, you're a writer, that was one of the criteria in moving forward with a relationship with someone like Katie, is someone respecting the individuation, your creative process, you needing the space. And for other individuals, like that to her probably was like, this is amazing because obviously she's reciprocating and wanting that for herself. But for others, maybe they don't feel comfortable in that, or they do feel like that's rejection or neglect, or they identify it as a withdrawing from the relationship. So what is your advice for couples to navigate and find that balance? What are things that they could be doing to honor both of those sides of themselves and honor those parts of themselves 100% within the relationship?
Well, first, understand that in a close relationship, marriage or whatever it is, people tend to fight about the same three or four things: chores, sex, money, and kids. Chores, sex, money, and kids. Not even in that order. Chores is usually number one, but sometimes it can be money, sex, and kids, or kids, sex, and money. But there are only a limited set of things to argue about. And one of the things that we say in our seminars is you're never arguing about what you think you're arguing about. Somebody yesterday I was working with, she was daddy's little girl. That was kind of her identity as a kid. And they used to do everything together. And, everybody talked about her being daddy's little girl. And her sister was more like mom's girl. But anyway, that was an identity for her. Unfortunately, when she was 11 years old, her father got sent to prison in a white collar thing that involved, millions of dollars, stockbroker kind of things. Anyway, he ended up in prison. So there's daddy's little girl going into puberty with this big, empty place in herself. And so a lot of times what happens is we go to one of two directions. We either tend to play out our old programming. Like, for example, in her case, it would have been to get involved with a lot of bad boys or juvenile delinquents or people that were, heading for prison. Or it could be to go the other direction and pick out real safe relationships where those issues would never come up. And she sort of did a combination of both of those things until she woke up in her 20s and realized that she was basing her adult relationships based on something that had happened when she was a kid. So we've all got that problem in a way, Kat. We've all got to wake up one day. Usually, hopefully it's in our 20s, but sometimes it's in our 30s or later, where you wake up one day and you realized, oh, wait a minute, I need to take responsibility for what goes on in my life. I can't blame my college or my high school or my mother or my father or my programming. I need to take responsibility for it myself. And same thing with relationships. I need to, like I say, we need to get our picker fixed. A lot of us have a damaged picker when we get up into adult life, is we pick relationships based on an old pain, and that's never going to work. And so I got my picker fixed when I was in my early 30s. So I went out and picked myself a real solid gold, amazing woman that had so much depth to her. But it was a much better choice than I made when I was 21 years old and making a choice based on having been dumped by my high school girlfriend and being lonely and feeling vulnerable. So at some point in life, we need to take responsibility for waking up ourselves and creating the kind of life we most want and need. But I've met people in their 60s who haven't made that choice to really take responsibility for themselves yet. They're still bouncing around, getting somebody else to do it for them. And I always say, unless you figure out your own life purpose, bet on the fact that you're serving somebody else's life purpose. And it may be an unconscious one. And so we need to get busy about figuring out what we're here for and what we want in ourselves and in relationship, because that's part of being a healthy adult human being, is making your own dreams come true. Once I figured out what my dreams were, it didn't take me long at all to make them come true. And many of them are still coming through this day. But, I've made all my dreams come true. And I'm only 78 years old, so I'm just getting started.
Yeah. And so with that, it's owning your dreams, pursuing those dreams, and then partners who can support and understand the ability to make those dreams happen sometimes happens alone and sometimes with the support of the other and not based off of the other in their life.
Exactly. That what you want to do is have your own sense of individuation so strong that even when you're in the arms of your beloved, you still have a sense of self. And so a lot of people abandon that sense of self when they get into relationships. And we got to make sure we don't do that anymore, because that path always leads toward misery for not only for yourself, but usually other people as well.
Yeah, it's a funny myth that we believe like, oh, that type of devotion or that type of, it's confusing being supportive and encouraging with being enabling or like allowing the relationship to function in a way that's not supporting both people. Like it's not moving forward. It's not, I like how you say, like, you're not co creating in those situations. You're kind of giving into this myth that, like, oh, sacrifice and compromise is true love.
Yeah, that's a dangerous illusion to get involved with. A friend of mine visited his parents a while back, and he sent me a text sharing a little bit of dialogue. This is codependence to the extreme. His father, who's about 80 years old, at dinner says, "Mother, would I like some more beans?" So his wife was in charge of making the decision about whether he wanted more beans. But, it sounds ridiculous when you say it, but a lot of us get enmeshed to that degree that we don't really have any idea what we want anymore. It's all about what somebody else wants for us.
And then to wrap up, one of the things that actually someone just said this on the previous podcast interview that I had, they had said, don't let relationships rob you of your honesty. And you and Katie both speak to microscopic truth. And I feel like it is a crucial element and very practical part of co-committing and building the kind of relationship that isn't codependent, is this microscopic truth.
Yeah, because if you say, "I'm angry" to you, that's very different than if I said to you, "You really piss me off." Because if I say, "You really pissed me off," I'm identifying you as the perpetrator and me as the victim. Whereas if I say, "I'm angry," I'm not claiming that you put that anger there. I'm claiming that anger for myself, which is really true, because here's where it happened. Here's the nervous system over here, what got angry. And it wasn't you, because if somebody else had been sitting here, maybe they wouldn't have gotten angry at all. But in relationships, we get pretty good at learning how to push each other's buttons too. And it's important to really get that microscopic truth saying figured out. Because if you say to another person, "I feel sad right now," that opens up a tremendous possibility for a conversation where the other person can say, "Oh, I feel sad too," or "What's on your mind?" or something. But if I say, you know, "I was doing fine until you came into my life, Kat, and now I'm miserable all the time." Well, that doesn't make for a very good conversation, because person A over here has already got the problem figured out, and it's you, so within that, you can't have, because a relationship can only be between equals. So if I figured out that you're the perpetrator and I'm the victim, that's not an equal relationship. So eventually we got to kind of come up to the edge and take 100% responsibility for what we create in our lives in order to have a fast, efficient way to change it. As long as you think you're the victim of somebody else, you got to wait for them to change. And that's sometimes a very long wait.
Absolutely. My mom, she often gets asked, like, what's what's your advice for a successful marriage? My father and her have been married for almost 40 years. And her advice is often, it's 100. And people will be like, what? And she's like, it's 100%, 100%. She had not read your book. She wasn't. And then when she told me this, she had said this to me in the spring, that someone got married that we knew, and they asked her that advice. And I was like, wow, Mom, like that's exactly what I just read last fall in this book. And I kind of talked to her about it. And she's like, no, it's true, though. You can't show up 50-50 expecting someone else to complete you or have someone else to blame for all of the things going on in your life. It's, you literally have to show up 100% every day and choose the person, choose yourself and choose the other person. And that has stuck with me, and also resonates with your work and how we can function within the relationship, identifying where it's victim and blaming, or understanding where, John Lennon said it, they give us this illusion that we are not whole beings born, and we're meant to seek out and find somebody to complete us. And that's not the truth.
Yeah, that's really well. Give your mother a big hug for me because she really is passing out great wisdom out there in the world.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with the world. I truly appreciate your time. It's such an honor to have you on the podcast to talk about relationships, codependency, and how we engage and interact with each other. And hopefully, through this work, I think on this level of one-on-one working with our microscopic relationships, the relationships of the day to day, can make a huge difference in how the world functions as a whole. So I appreciate so much your books and your work. Thank you so much, Gay, for taking the time out of your day to be on Head South Radio.
My pleasure, Kat. Thanks for spreading the word.
Just one quick little closing. How do people find you?
Oh, yes. Well, our books are everywhere. Conscious Loving and The Big Leap are wherever books are sold. Hendricks.com is our website, HENDRICKS.com. Way back in the early days of the internet, we got our first website, and so we've been adding to it ever since. We have a foundation also called the Foundation for Conscious Living that you can look that up. It has a lot of free resources like videos and relationship videos. But either Hendricks.com or the Foundation for Conscious Living is the best place to come across our work. And we're on Instagram and Twitter and all those, Facebook and all those places too.
Thank you so much for joining us. We will include all of those links in the notes for the podcast as well and share that with everybody. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.